So in this room here, which is this little alcove of the main gallery, we brought together works that are extremely delicate. It's a little bit like a cabinet de curiosité, dedicated with artists from Portugal and artists from abroad, but they all have something in common. They are interested in the world of text, the world of literature, the world of poetry or politics. For instance, here you have this work by the amazing Portuguese artist Ana Atterley, which is this moment where the writing is becoming a drawing, that the poem itself is there to be read, but it's also there to be seen. When you look at a work like that, you can remember a very early example of this kind of work. There is a long tradition in art history of what we call visual poetry, or poetry that challenges the linearity of the white pages. It can start with, Lewis Carroll when he writes The Mouse Tale, and the writing of the Mouse Tale actually draws the tale, or Guillaume Apollinaire poems called Il pleut, it rains, and the writing of Il pleut define the raindrops on the paper. And you have something a little bit similar here with Ana Atterley, or here with the work by the Belgian artist Marcel Brotars. What's interesting here, and both in front of each other, in this room, which is a little bit like a library, you are surrounded by two bookshelves, but the bookshelves don't have books anymore. With Marcel Brotars, that the bookshelf becomes a book itself, because the text, the letter, the scripture, the writing exist on the bookshelf, and the book has disappeared. Same thing here with this work by the Portuguese artist Álvaro Lapa, whose title is, I believe, Mallarmé's Bookshelf. If you took this tradition of visual poetry or poetry that defy the convention of poetry, Stéphane Mallarmé was one of the earliest artists or poets experimenting in this direction with his very, very famous poem, Jamais un coup de dé n'abolira le hasard, where chance, the notion of serendipity, the notion of how can we invent a text differently on the space of the page, was put in motion in the poem Jamais un coup de dé n'abolira le hasard. So in this room between Álvaro Lapa, who call into the conversation Stéphane Mallarmé, that also was an important reference for Marcel Brotars and Ana Atterley, you have this almost tradition of visual poetry that circulates between different art scenes and between different chronological moments of art history, and continues to this date. Actually, between Portugal, Brazil, and the rest of Europe, there's an entire network of artists working on the fringes of the convention of poetry or painting. Actually, you have even one here, a book by the artist Lourdes Castro, which is both a book, a sculpture, and a poetry and a drawing. I mentioned poetry, but I also mentioned politics. And here we have a work by the Brazilian artist Cildo Meireles, which is this almost a time capsule in 3 parts, with this bottle of Coca-Cola with the content that progressively is disappearing for the bottle, as if what Coca-Cola represents was losing importance, was little by little disappearing from culture. What's interesting here, of course, it's a work of art that belongs to the tradition, the Duchampian tradition of the ready-made, By that, I mean using an already existing object to produce a sculpture, but he's hacking, to use a language of today. He's hacking the structure because the language on the bottle of Coca-Cola has been affected by the artist, and instead of having the description of the content of Coca-Cola and what is already written on the bottle under the Coca-Cola name, he makes political statement. For instance, Yankee go home. So a political statement at a moment in history. The piece is from 1970s, where he brings into the making of the sculpture a geopolitical conversation. He's from Brazil, so between Latin America and the United States. It's also really interesting to look at this work from Cildo Meireles from 1970. I was mentioning early on the movement, the pop art movement, which came out of the United States, where the notion of consumption, where the notion of product, if you take artists like Andy Warhol, Roy Lichtenstein to a certain extent, Jasper Jones or Rauschenberg, where the product was in a way celebrated, critically celebrated. If you take the sculpture, the object by Andy Warhol, the Brillo box, which are this sculpture, this cube, which are like a box of soap. Here you have an artist coming from a different tradition, from a different culture, that follow this track of pop, but subverts it by including into the object a disruptive political discourse.